And thank you so much for joining us tonight at ESMOA. My name is Holly M. I'm the Director of Education here. It is such a pleasure to be able to offer this amazing talk to our friends on YouTube and to our guests who are with us this evening. We are so thrilled to be hosting a conversation with Free State featured artist Cole Sternberg, Nla City Controller candidate Kenneth Mejia, and writer Jennifer Swann, who will be moderating the discussion this evening.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I think this is like my first in-person post-Vax thing where we're all indoors. It's like new territory. It's very exciting. Thanks for everyone who tuned in at home. I feel like California is really, LA is back. It was just like bumper to bumper traffic getting here. I'm just kind of like, I don't know if I'm actually ready for what's to come. But let's get into it. So we're sitting here at the El Segundo Museum of Art. Cole Sternberg's show is up till September. If you haven't seen it yet, you can still see it. And for people who haven't seen it, tell us what we're looking about. Describe the room. Tell us a little bit about just like how this show came together.
Okay. Well, I'm Cole Sternberg. We're sitting here in the second room of the exhibition Free State. Free State's a story. Well, it's really the origin story of the Free Republic of California. And it goes through a few stages. First, there's the Agitprop propaganda structure, the posters, the clothing line, the Constitution's publication and such. The room we're in right now is meant to feel more like a historical museum or a lawyer's office. It's a little bit strange. And it is filled with, I think, 46 works. Those works are more of the mind bubble of the whole thing. Motivations for doing the exhibition, ways that this idea could really occur, and so forth. And then the third room is more a broad idea of freedom. I'll back up real quickly and say that the whole concept of the Free Republic is what could a more enlightened state look like through the guise of Californian secession. So the Free Republic could be the people up here right now, it could be California, it could be California and Oregon, it could be America, it could be the world. But how could we adjust our infrastructure appropriately for a modern time, which seems pretty difficult in the U.S. or really anywhere. So that's kind of the start of the whole thing.
And you mentioned succession, and I've heard that people have gone to the show, and there's a lot of ideas about, like, what are you advocating for? Are you advocating for Collexit, which is a thing, I think, that this idea that circulated after the 2016 election of people saying, California, we should break off from the rest of the country. I think it ended up on the ballot in 2019. It obviously did not pass. What is your take on that? Is that a misreading of the show?
Yes, yeah, that is I mean, I understand why people think that, because the whole idea is to trick people in that way. It gave me a starting point to build an infrastructure from, just having California as the base. Also, I grew up here, and there's certain values and positive things and negative things about California that I was intimately aware with and could adjust accordingly, but it's paralleled everywhere. And then the broader concepts, the Constitution, the budget, the visualization of this place, those things are applicable at least to the whole country. We have a very old Constitution in the U.S. that rarely gets amended, for instance. And that was meant to address that, not secede and use that Constitution. It's more an educational tool. I remember in high school learning about the U.S. Constitution, but not any other comparative document. And that's pretty strange. How do you really navigate the U.S. Constitution with comparing it to nothing and just being told, this is the Constitution, it's the greatest? So I like the idea that that especially, but the whole thing can operate as a comparative idea for U.S. history classes.
Mm-hmm. And just for anyone who's tuning in who's not in this room, just to kind of give you the vibe, it feels like very bureaucratic. It feels like we're in sort of like maybe like a mayor's office, some kind of government office. There's like green carpeting, and you've actually like made the ceiling a lot shorter with these beams. It's like a huge, beautiful high ceiling building, but right now it really feels like we're about to have like a town hall meeting in some town. I don't know where, but this is great.
You captured it correctly. And you're meant to feel enclosed and a little uncomfortable in here, and then the other rooms you feel a little more free, especially in the room to my right. Or you feel like a huge idea is about to happen in the front room using the 6 feet high in here. So
Wow.
it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah. And where in California did you grow up?
I grew up in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Like San Jose, Saratoga. I moved there when I was 3. My parents tricked me. They told me Disneyland was in California. They didn't tell me it was an 8-hour drive, and we only went a couple times. They also taught me the Dionne Warwick song, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? And that was my jam. So I got bamboozled. But even back then, I mean, not back then exactly, like when I was 8 or 9, I remember seeing a social dynamic that was a little bit different than Virginia, where I came from. So
I like that we're all more or less native Californians, grew up here. I grew up just north of the San Fernando Valley. You're from the San Fernando Valley, Kenneth. I like it. We got some northern, Southern California representation. And Kenneth, I want to ask you a little bit, like the most obvious question, which is just that I'm sure you get this every day, but just like if you could tell us what is a city controller, right? Because I think like for the most part people know, what the mayor does, right? Like maybe they know what their city council person is. Controller, a little bit confusing, a little bit ambiguous. Tell me, what is an LA City Controller?
Yeah, the city controller actually is the lowest turnout race in the history of City of LA elections, but it has a lot of power. It's a city position along with the mayor and the city attorney, and as well as with the 15 city council members, but we're the city's accountant and also the city's auditor. So a lot of people, when they think about accountants, they're like, it might not be that appealing, so that's why there's a low turnout. But as city controller, we're in charge of the budget after it's been approved, making sure that we're not spending money that we don't have. We're also in charge of making sure that we're auditing city departments, city programs, making sure that we're not wasting money on any inefficiencies or anything that's ineffective.
Never. In LA?
Exactly.
Why would we?
And so we're the city's watchdog. And I think it's a very important position that I think hasn't been used or fully utilized. And we're here to change that. So.
And I should add, Kenneth is running for city controller in the 2022 election, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And I think that there's a lot of connections between, even though you both do like very different types of work, I think one through line is obviously money, right? And I think that both of you have an interest in government spending and campaign fundraising and tax collecting, all of the things that people tend to kind of hear and tune out. But you're engaged in work. You do it in a way that it seems like there's a strategy behind it to actually get people to tune in and pay attention to what cities and what state and government is actually spending money on. And so I just wanted to ask, how did you? I mean, you're also a CPA, right? So like you look at budgets a lot. This is not new for you. You're also a lawyer, so you're coming at it from these, more technical backgrounds. But what got you interested in looking at budgets, and what are some of the strategies that you use to turn other people on to like, oh, this stuff is actually really important?
Yeah, I mean, a city's budget reflects the city's priorities, and what drew me to it is not only, I've been a certified public accountant, a CPA. I've been doing accounting and auditing for 11 years, but I thought that this could actually be something really, really cool and useful. And when have you ever heard of like a progressive accountant? Like no one's ever heard of that. And what we're aiming to do is we're educating the community, on social media, through our graphics, through our billboard, through just making accounting more appealing and finance more appealing, because we're teaching people that we can take our city's money and put it to things that are useful. We can show where we're wasting our money, and I think a lot of people are starting to be more attuned to the controller position now. And I think this is, especially with the past year, with everything happening, George Floyd and everything, I feel like city budgets now are being critically analyzed. And it's very important that you have people up there who can explain it to people in a way that's understandable. Because right now, if you look up the budget, or if you look up the controller's website, no one knows like where to look at and how to understand it. And so I think that's why we picked this position, because it's something that, you know, I've been doing, and I feel like we can actually use it for something useful and helpful for our community.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too. I want to get back to you in a second, but I also want to talk about this idea that it seems like looking at budgets and really targeting budgets and making demands has become a really effective political strategy, like an activist strategy. We have the People's City budget, which is, you know, a budget put together by progressive activists in LA, sort of reimagining how the city can spend their money. I know that you've also, I don't know if you've been involved in that campaign specifically. I know you've shared graphics from them. But I think it's like this amazing moment where people are realizing, like, oh, we can do more than make, you know, a demand for policy or representation. Like, where our money goes, where our taxpayer dollars go, really matters, especially when it comes to things like reducing police presence, or, you know, maybe we want more parks or more healthcare, those kinds of things. And also, if any of you are on TikTok, I definitely recommend following Kenneth. He has amazing dance videos, great moves, where you'll kind of like dance in front of the city budget. Can you talk about sort of just the strategy of how you're really, like, you're literally dancing to get people to look at these finance numbers?
Yeah, so TikTok is revolutionary. I mean, and our team, we have a lot of youth. We have people, Gen Z, who know how to use TikTok, and they recommended we use it. And what we're doing is we are, you know, maybe this is a form of Agitprop, but we're basically putting these shocking numbers behind us on a green screen. Like, you know, we paid $30 million in lawsuits against the LAPD, and the largest lawsuit was related to a LAPD sergeant for sexual harassment. And then, like, I'm in front of it, and I'm like dancing, and then people are like, wait a second, like, oh my God, I didn't know that at all. But, you know, our point is we want to reach out to a certain demographic, especially the youth. I think the youth are developing their opinions right now, and I feel like, you know, we want to educate them and show them it in a way that they could understand a little, even though I'm dancing, but like right behind them is really substantive, like, details about our city's priorities and whatnot. So definitely I feel like we use art in such a way to make this race really, really interesting and appealing to people.
Yeah, you like can't look away from it. It's just, there's such a disconnect between like the dancing and the numbers, and you're like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
And you also have a billboard, right, in Olympic and Crenshaw, which is not too far from Mayor Eric Garcetti's residence. And it's one of those things where I think, like, one thing that's really effective about the campaign is just there's these sort of bar graphs, right? And you can very clearly see the amount that we spend on the police, for example, is what, like 3 times the amount on...
Yeah, it's $3.1 billion. And we have this giant billboard, and we ask rhetorical questions like, is the mayor's budget good for you? Or do you know where your tax dollars will be spent? Or, you know, because no one knows. And we're showing this really large bar graph, and you see the police at $3.1 billion. Then you see housing has $200 million, and then you have homelessness, which is $800 million, and transportation. You know, just really showing the difference in what our priorities are. And I think a lot of people are seeing this. If you visit it, it's on Olympic and Crenshaw. It's a 1-minute stop intersection, so it's like perfect for people. So yeah, it's a couple of blocks away from his mayor's mansion.
I like that you're bringing it to the people. Everyone just
driving
in LA because we don't spend money on transportation, you know? So, and one other thing too that you know, I'm following your Twitter feed. You're super active on Twitter. One of the stats, you'll kind of pick out these stats of like, here's what the average day costs for LAPD hourly pay for helicopters. I live in Highland Park, and every single day I feel like I hear a dozen helicopters swarming. And now I start thinking, like, how much is this costing? You know, and I watched your video, and it's like, okay, I can calculate this. But one of the stats that really shocked me was about how much it costs to get LAPD out patrolling at the Echo Park Lake protest that happened, I think, at the end of March, right? They were sweeping out a homeless encampment, and there was very heavy police presence. There were, protesters against it. And just for one of those nights, right, it was like $848,000. This is just an overtime pay for one day. And over the span of 3 days, it was like, well over $1 million. It was really mind-boggling to see these numbers.
right? And I think when people are watching the news or people are seeing videos, they're like, why is there so much police? And people are saying, oh, that's a waste of tax dollars. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to quantify that. And I think that's one of our big positions that we're going to do, and one of our goals, I feel like, that we want to be at these large protests to audit the police and their performance there.
In real time, almost.
In real time,
yeah.
exactly, because it's a lot of money. $1 million in the span of 8 hours is ridiculous. So,
yeah, and you think about it, and there's like people without homes, and you're like,
right.
where could this money be used, you know?
Exactly.
And Cole, I want to go back to this question too of like, were you someone that like would always just look up city budgets when you were a kid? Like, how did you get involved in this, and why? Oh, I should point out too that we're actually sitting right in front of, I don't know the name of this piece.
It's part of the budget. It's the discretionary funds of the U.S. government.
And it's
for the last 50 years.
It's pretty incredible because it's just 4 columns. It has the year, defense, non-defense total. And as you compare them, you can see that for the most part it sort of equalizes at a certain part, which is still a little bit horrifying, but you know, that the amount of defense spending is in some years like vastly more than the non-defense spending, right? So you're kind of employing a similar strategy of just literally laying these numbers bare to kind of, like I looked at that and it was just so overwhelming to kind of be like, oh, everything that we spend is equal to the amount that we spend on defense in this country.
Oh yeah, and it doesn't change necessarily at the beginning of a war or the end of a war or the change of administration. It's always this mega number. The discretionary budget's the part that the executive has more flexibility with. So theoretically, you could shift it a lot, and it just never does. But to go back to your question, yes, I just love looking at budgets all the time. It's my jam.
Who amongst us?
Just like Kenneth, we're on the budget train. No, for this show, I knew California was a donor state, so I wanted to see what that meant and how much money that.
Can you explain what that means?
So a donor state, there's certain states that we all pay federal taxes, and you get a semi-quantifiable amount of services back from the federal government. And the more business-heavy states like California or New York give more than they get back. So in my estimate, based on a couple of studies, it's about 78 cents that we get per dollar. And then Kentucky is more like they get $3 for every dollar. So there's a big difference there. And I thought, well, okay, let's say we provide all of the same services at the same cost, but we'll take that 22 cents back. That's a little bit of money, and then, a lot of money, and then I just cut one other thing, which is the military. Yeah, I cut the military by 75%, the Californian contribution, which is about 14% of the total, and added that money back to the coffers theoretically. And that still put us in the top 15 militaries of the world as California alone.
Wow.
The U.S. government spends about $700 billion a year on the military. China's at $120 billion, and then it quickly drops, 80, 70, 60, 40, 30, and that seems wild to me. Year in and year out, we already have the biggest military. I know there's some maintenance, but to continue to do that no matter what, when we can't provide health care or education or low-income housing or environmental sustainability seemed crazy. So I decided I have to make a budget. I looked at the state of California budget in terms of format. How deeply you go into those line items, for example. And then I figured out, well, how much does this stuff cost? How much could universal health care theoretically cost? How much could higher education cost, and so on? And it was shocking. 10% of the amount that California pays for the American military would give higher education to our entire state, 2-year, 4-year, in-state, out-of-state, public, private.
Wow.
And that's, only 10%. The benefit from that is massive. Universal health care, same thing. It actually saves a ton of money. If you're Japan, you pay half as much as Americans do per person for health care, and you live 6 years longer. So
sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah, occasionally people think this is a very left-wing thing I'm doing, but I think these are apolitical, rational things. Why wouldn't we want to save money and live longer? It just seems pretty silly to me. And why wouldn't we want to go to college for free? I'm 41 now. I'm still paying my law school loans every month, and it's very annoying. So that's where it went. I mean, I love the joy of painting, not the joy of Excel spreadsheets, but that information,
It's so beautiful.
you know, the information's so powerful. Controller being the least exciting maybe of roles, but actually one of the most important. People love talking about money, but hate talking about budgets, and you just can't do one without the other in a functioning government.
Just curious, given that it sounds like you spend a fair amount of time looking at budgets, and like, you know, has there been kind of a line item or a weird, just something that's surprised you, you know, when you're kind of poring over the LA City budget, or if you're looking at, you know, state or federal budgets? Is there anything where you're like, oh wow, we spend millions of dollars on like sheep for an abatement program, like just something kind of strange that the average person might be surprised at?
So one interesting thing that we saw is, it's within the LAPD's budget, is Garcetti and the department proposed like a little more than more than $118,000 for LAPD boot cleaners, like sanitizer boot cleaners. And so it's just ridiculous how much money they're spending on the police to clean their boots. And, you know, we made this graphic, and a lot of people were having fun with it. It's like, oh, they need people to clean their boots or something. And it was just, I thought that was like really interesting on how we're spending so much money on sanitizing on their boots and people's reaction to that. So that stood out to me. And then just the massive sheer amount of money we're spending on the department, you know, like similar to the discretionary spending on the federal level and the local level. We spend 46% of our discretionary budget on the police. So it's about $2.9 billion. Ooh. And it's about close to half, right? And then, you know, like Cole said, discretionary spending, we can literally spend it on anything. And, you know, that's just compared to a lot of the other areas that we're not spending money on. It's really, really massive, and it's been like this year after year. So.
Wow. I have to know though, like the boot cleaners, are these actual people who come in and like shoe shine, or is this like cleaning equipment?
Yeah, they're boot sanitizer equipment. So I'm assuming like they stand somewhere and then it just
oh my goodness.
And then now their boots are clean and they're good. So yeah, 100 something thousand. So that's where our money is going to.
Oh my God.
That's wild.
How about you? Is there anything that you've stumbled upon that's very curious?
I mean, well, it's more of a broad thing, but it relates to that because there's a lack of federal transparency. So military people I've spoken to, for instance, say, well, in the $700 billion, we spend a lot on medical research and technology and this and that. And other countries take that out of that budget and, you know, explain it to their populace, but we don't. So it was just shocking that their justification for the high number was a lack of transparency. And then the EPA's minute budget was shocking too. Wow, yeah. I mean, in my budget, we could have quadruple of that budget with those two changes. And we could have 10 times that if we wanted. So I just couldn't believe, downloading these federal spreadsheets and looking state by state, it was shocking that more people aren't annoyed with the lack of transparency.
Yeah, and it seems like something that people just don't know, right? So like ideally, part of what you're doing is making people more aware of these numbers, right? So it's like, because how many people are just going to go to like the federal government's website, download some Excel spreadsheets? They don't make it accessible, right? Like it's not easy to consume.
I think I was the first one.
Yeah, and you're just like, what?
Yeah, it's a hard. That's one thing I really like about Kenneth's campaign and my own little project is taking that complicated stuff and explaining it quickly, because we just don't have the bandwidth, any of us, or time to really dig into it. Look at how people look at their phones. Like, you really have to get it fast.
Yeah.
And I think the media could maybe talk about it a little bit more too, because it seems like we just repeat the same stories all day, but these are big issues that they could cover.
Yeah. Need more TikToks. We need more Instagram slideshows.
I'm a horrible dancer, though. I don't know.
Yeah, you got to do something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Music. I want to talk a little bit about the show too, because one thing that struck me walking around is like normally when you walk into the show, you have like Mamas and the Papas playing California Dreaming on a loop, just over and over and over, to the point that it's almost like it's very saccharine, right? And there's all of this imagery of these like California kind of like slogans, and I don't know if you'd call it propaganda, but it's like you have like John Muir quotes, and you have a Jimmy Carter quote about California, and there's so much that plays on just like this popular idea, right, of like how we think of California, or how your parents got you to be excited about California, right? It's like Disneyland, and there's all these pop songs about it. And so I was in the show, like, looking at all these images and listening to this music and thinking about just this sort of like gap between like how we think of California and then how California really is, right? Like we tend to think of it as this like liberal utopia. And then you look at the budget and you're like, oh, actually, it's not quite so liberal, right? Like we could give people free healthcare or college, we don't. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you reconcile, this like popular notion of California versus the reality of our budget and our policy.
Oh, sure. I mean, the idea with California dreaming and the whole thing is it a dream? Is this idea of California just a dream? What are we really talking about? The song is also kind of creepy, so that's another element. And I'll pair a sort of elegant John Muir-esque Yosemite visual with how the federal government did the Vietnam draft, for instance, the lottery. So I am jumping between the sort of glorious and the dark in order to find a more glorious space. Like we have to be aware of the issues and aware of the positive things in order to push ahead. So that's kind of how I see it. But it is meant to take you on this little bit of a whirlwind. And even the like massive gate in the other room is just slightly slanted, just to keep reiterating this bit of confusion of what's real and what's not.
Yeah. What's a dream? What's the real California?
Yeah, what's a dream? What's a nightmare?
Yeah. There's also, is it an oak tree out here? There's like it's sort of shaped like a slingshot or a peace sign, right? Depending how you look at it. And yeah, when I was here, there was like termites crawling out of it too, which is like so much darkness and the beauty of California.
They're woodworms. There's a lot of them in there.
Excuse me. Okay.
It's an accidental Pierre Huyghe homage, I think, but they're slowly eating away this piece of a live oak, which was trimmed to save the live oak, and the live oak's one of California's official trees. It's because it's a glorious tree, but so I like that sort of duality there as well. The worms are eating it away, but it's still a great, amazing bit of a tree.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that's such an apt metaphor just for this place that we live in, where it's like can be so gorgeous and so just idyllic, and then half the year the state is totally on fire, or it's like you can't breathe the air. And I think like, as I know, like for someone who grew up here, I feel like I'm always sort of maybe I just live in this delusion, right, where I'm just like defending it, or just being like, oh, well, California's the greatest, or LA's the greatest. And then when you think about it, it's like, man, we have a lot of really serious problems here. And it's this back and forth where I'm like, well, I'll probably never be able to buy a house, or who knows if this land will exist, right? Like, I don't know. There's like this constant sort of danger and hellish place, even in the most beautiful place.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things to unpack there, but there's the push and pull. One being a lot of the media and the country likes to try to tear California down.
Yeah.
And that inherently makes us try to build it back up because we like it here. So Elon Musk building a Tesla factory, suddenly everyone says everyone's leaving California. But meanwhile, Bloomberg released a report where we're growing business by far better than any other state. So we have a sort of like desire to fight back, but also the expense of housing especially, or the just expensive living is insane. Another article I saw is how the 49ers coach has to consult new players that are drafted to tell them their multi-million-dollar contract is not going to get them the mansion that they expect in the Bay Area.
God.
And I just thought, wow, that's wild. There's definitely, that's an extreme of capitalism that we need to fight against, and we need to figure out how to have a real community of people. If every house costs over $1 million, I don't know how you do that.
It's like this cult of California. Like, we hate it, but we can't leave, and it's just, it is like nowhere else, you know what I mean? There's just this like vibe, and there's just, the mountains, the beaches, and the horror of walking around LA and just seeing people living on the streets and just so many things that are horrifying and beautiful at the same time. I saw someone outside actually wearing like a SpaceX shirt, because I think they're right over here in like Playa Vista. Hawthorne. Okay, yeah. So it feels like very, even just being in El Segundo, like I know you have this piece. I think it's over here commenting on the Chevron, right? And like Chevron, when you step outside in like downtown El Segundo, the refineries are right here on the beach. Like you can't miss them. It takes over the horizon. And you have this piece that sort of comments on like the fact that the beach is right here, and Chevron is sort of destroying this landscape and pumping all this money into the arts to kind of disguise that, right? Or make you look away.
Yeah, that refinery is a visual terror to me. And in another piece, I just Photoshop it out of the beach. It's from what I've been told, it's the most profitable refinery in America because it shoots 75% of its fuel to LAX in a big pipeline that's probably under our feet. So it's a huge challenge, the idea of asking them to leave. But it's such a, like, the bad parts of America that are in this show and the beauty of California that's in the show merge so effectively in a sad way there. Like that beach has a great strand of sand, and then boom, this huge refinery there. I mean, I'm laughing in this dark comedy kind of way about it, but
it's grotesque.
It's hard.
Yeah. And how do you think about LA? Like, I know you grew up here, you grew up in Silmar, and the Valley is its own beast, right? But like, I feel like people think of LA too, like they think of California as like this like liberal bastion, and again, like, you watch Fox News and they're like, or Trump talking points of being like, can't believe I even like said his name, I feel like I'm back in a year behind. But you watch the news and it's like LA, all these problems because they're so liberal and these things happening, and then you look at the budget, right, and you're like, oh, we spend $100,000 on shoe shining for LAPD. So like, how do you kind of think about LA and think about, how people think of Hollywood on the news or in movies, right, versus what it really is? And how, like, do you think, what would it take to kind of get to a place where we actually are a more progressive city, maybe what like the rest of the country thinks that we are?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think LA is this great, liberal, safe haven for people, but, it's really not. Like you said, when you look at our spending priorities, or if you look at our policies, a lot of people are hurting, and a lot of people who are hurting are not getting those resources that they need, or the city's not making policies that are helping them. And I think it's really important that you have people who are knowledgeable, like what we're doing with finance, and explaining it to people in a way that's just easy to understand and can also spark people's interest, right? And whether it's through TikTok or through something really like some medium, but it's really surprising and it really strikes, like they're like, oh damn, like I didn't know that's like really good. Then that can actually start sparking change from people, and we've done posts and things like that where it really gets people thinking about like, holy crap, I didn't know that. So like one of the big things in LA and even around the country is that cities during COVID can get reimbursed from FEMA to house their unhoused neighbors in hotels, and they even get services, right? And the city of LA didn't do like a great job at housing our unhoused neighbors in these places, and this has been since last year, since through March, and it goes through September of this year. And what we saw was that the city was saying that they don't have cash, we don't have money, we can't do it. And then we spoke to the city controller, the current one, and he actually told us like he was bothered by what the mayor and what the city officials were saying, because he said if it's a matter of cash flow, we have around $10 to $11 billion in our treasury where we can front the money and get reimbursed immediately by Biden and FEMA, and he was just disturbed by that. And so we're nowhere near what we could have done. There are over 40,000 people living on who are unhoused, and we only did a small fraction. I think at its peak was around 2,000 or so that we put in the hotels, and so when people think about LA and they think it's so progressive, and we got Garcetti and he's a shining light, and then when you like live here and you dig deeper into it, and which is what we did, we broke that story, it gets people really thinking like, damn, LA is not that liberal or progressive, like, safe space for people, right? It's really, if you are low income, if, you know, person of color, if, you know, it's hard to live here. You know, many people are getting evicted. Many people are living on the streets and they can't get out of it, and they're getting criminalized just for living on the streets, right? Like what you see happening in Venice or Echo Park. And it's just these cruel policies, right? And then backed behind it, you have this overbloated military budget for our police, you know, that takes pretty much 30% of our entire city's spending. And so, you know, I think it's going to take creativity, it's going to take art, it's going to take people who have a passion and a knowledge of these things that are confusing to people, but can explain it in a way that can really, really, like, spark that interest and then spark that action to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Because I think, you know, like you were saying, it's sort of an easy talking point to be like, how are we going to pay for these things, right? We don't have the money. And I think when you're digging in, you're like, well, we have this money, right? We have this federal aid, this FEMA money coming in, and people just don't want to do it. Then you kind of have to start asking, like, okay, why don't they want to do it? Where's the resistance coming from? And then it becomes sort of another, there's something beyond it, right? There's something political, there's some kind of opposition to housing people, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's 18 months of free money, you know, and they could have gotten reimbursed, and we still have it till September. And like you said, who do they not want to upset? Do they not want to upset the hotel industry? You know, do they not want to upset the high-income earners where these hotels are? Because there are a lot of vacant hotels, and there are a lot of hotels that we subsidize. Over the next, you know, 20 or so years, the city of LA is going to subsidize $1 billion to real estate developers of these hotels. And it makes no sense that these same hotels are not willing to help people, you know, where and they're getting our money for that. And so it's you know, who are they trying to upset? We don't know, but I mean, we do know, but you know, it's like we're just hoping that enough people can get upset about it and then, you know, join an org and take action.
Yeah. And I've seen you kind of say, you know, when you're explaining what a controller is, this idea that, like, controller doesn't make policies, but you use data to help, you know, push certain issues, to show what a city's priorities are, to push a certain way. And I think, like, when you have that data, like you're saying, it's harder to kind of push back on just rhetoric, right? Because you're like, oh, well, right here, like, here's your receipts, you know?
Exactly. You know, it's the saying is numbers don't lie, and, you know, and we're showing it to them, and we're really proud that we're able to debunk a lot of myths and things like that with these hard facts, and like you said, we can't change policy, but we can show you these numbers on a giant billboard and be like, wait, hey, look at this. Like, I can't tell you what to do, but, like, maybe you'll get pissed off enough that you'll then push your city council member who is in charge of the policy to then change it. And so, yeah.
I like this idea of, like, anger as a incentive or, like, a motivator, because it is powerful. And I think, like, I read a statement about the show where you were saying that, like, we're in this sort of precarious moment where, you know, we're no longer in the Trump administration, the pandemic is sort of, we're vaccinated, I'll say that. I don't want to be, like, too optimistic, but that there is this era of, like, relaxation, right? People are not on edge as much as they were, say, 6 months ago, for sure. And that part of the idea behind the show was trying to kind of get people, like, similarly using numbers and images to kind of get people angry, right? And
sure, and the law too. I mean, these are evergreen issues. There's no mention of Trump in here or anything. I mean, there is my ticket to the impeachment hearing. That's the only hint at that person. But these police problems have always been here. We're just able to film them now, and people are more aware. Sustainability, we're always horrible at that. Not being able to have healthcare and sustainability and the environment, and low-income housing and all these different things, those are always there.
Yeah.
And Garcetti and Newsom are super smart people and are empowered by 65% of the populace, at least, voting for them. And yet they still don't make any of these dramatic changes we want, even having the numbers behind them. I wrote a letter to Newsom asking him to change the entire Constitution.
How did that go?
No, I haven't got a response yet. I think he's going to do it.
We're waiting as soon as you're watching this.
But there are symbolic things that the California Constitution could change for the better, changing the pronouns of the Constitution, for instance. We're in Pride Month. Like, why can't we just change the pronouns of the Constitution? Would that affect anything in the law? No. I mean, that would just be a positive movement. And it's not the U.S. Constitution, but then it, like a lot of things in our government, California starts something and it forces the rest of the country to do the same. So maybe, with the law and the numbers are these things that people don't want to know about, but they are the things that control everything. So if we could just figure out these little ways to navigate, calling your city council person because you saw the billboard and you realize, holy shit, we're spending billions. There's a helicopter that should be in some military conflict that we should also not be in, that I just paid for up there. And I paid for the one in Afghanistan too. I mean, it's just wild, and I can't go to the hospital. It's just this whack thing. I just don't understand it. And just like basic, these are just rational thoughts. They're not like revolutionary in terms of what you should do. They're revolutionary, I guess, if you speak loud enough and it actually makes something happen.
Mm-hmm. You brought up Governor Gavin Newsom, and we were just talking before this about these like lotteries, right, to get like unvaccinated people to get that. Like it's very jarring to see like Dream Vacation and all of these things when we know there's a big homeless problem. There's just the crises unfolding on our streets. And the thing is too, like we have this amazing budget surplus down in California. I think we have like $75 billion, plus we're having like $25 billion in federal aid. Just curious, like if you were in that position, what would you like to see California spend that money on, even if it was something totally wild?
On a state level, I would like to see us push towards a universal healthcare single-payer system. I know that's something that people have been trying to push here for a while now, and it actually always passes, like from the Assembly and the Senate, and then it gets like vetoed by the governor or by like the speaker or something, and we have the money, like you all said, like Cole said, and you actually save money when you move towards a universal healthcare single-payer system. So that's one thing that I would like to see, because the opportunity cost of spending on like a militarized police or military in general is other things like healthcare or education. And I think healthcare is like one of the number one bankruptcy causes here in America, and I think on a state level I would like to see healthcare be covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have the eviction moratorium, I think is being lifted on July 1st, and it's like there's so many things where you're like, can't you just put the money in this other slot? Right. It's pretty wild.
I mean, for me, definitely healthcare, but also this higher education thing. I mean, in my math, which granted it could be totally wrong, but I think it's pretty close, it was about $20 billion to pay for all this education. We could get that out of our own budget. We don't even have to have a revolution and stop paying our federal taxes to do it. So why don't we just do that? And those two things combined help grow income at lower levels that the silly trickle-down economics or whatever some people want to push doesn't work at all. If you can be healthy and you can be educated, you have a nice chance in life. And maybe you can afford one of these ridiculously expensive houses at some point too. So that would be my other thing, just low-income housing. I mean, we need to create a real community of people, and that's not by having only extreme wealth living in your neighborhood.
Yeah, just be more like the Japanese, right? Live longer, be more educated.
Eat better ramen.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I feel like we're about wrapping up. I wanted to kind of see if there's any other thoughts about your show that you would tell someone who hasn't seen it, or something that maybe is misunderstood about it, and then if you have anything to kind of wrap up about your campaign.
Sure. I mean, I think everyone should see it in person. There's a physicality that's very nice, but there's a lot of information. You'd have to spend hours here to go through it. also the website for it, it has about triple the information. So I just recommend people go there and dig into it. The Constitution is on there in English and Spanish. The budget's on there in English and Spanish. I wrote a whole history of California that's on there in English and Spanish that isn't even in this show. And there's a new part that is activation methods. So there's currently 16 issues. You can click on an issue, read how we address it, and then there's a button to go to your own representatives to contact them. There's a letter you can use. There's posters, stickers, buttons for each issue that you can make your own. So I would just like people to see that. I don't know how many people really look at it, but you don't have to do anything necessarily, but I think it'll motivate you to get out there a little bit and pulling on these issues a little bit better.
So you have templates. There's like a direct link between the art and, activism of emailing your representative, writing them a letter. You're kind of making it easy for people.
Yes, yeah, and they're funny letters too. I mean, they're funny or poetic or aggressive. It depends on which one. But I mean, I love Move On in those organizations with how you click on things, but they don't try to address the personal idea. Like, you're still mailing a letter to a person.
Yes.
And they don't tend to take that into account, whereas I think mine have a little bit of humanity in them. So people should do the same. I mean, why not? With the internet, it takes 2 minutes as well.
It's freerepublicofcalifornia.com?
No, someone owns that one, I think. It's the freerepublicofcalifornia.com. I don't know, really. I'm just joking.
Okay.
But it has a the at the beginning.
Okay, so go to the website. Everything is there.
Everything's there. Come to SMOA. Check it out. Vote for Kenneth.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the El Segundo Museum of Art. Thanks to Cole for having me, Jen for moderating. This is amazing. This is the first time that I think our team or myself has ever done something like this in a museum and talk about art and activism in this way. And I think it's really, really important because I think we do it. It's just we're not. And then when we think about oh damn, we are doing this too a little bit with what we're doing online and with our billboard and everything. And I think it's really important. And we really try as a campaign and our team, because we have so many people to intersect art and activism together, because we live in a society where there are oppressive systems in place that have been here for a while, and you can't do the same thing over and over again, and you have to reimagine solutions. And I think that's what art does, and that's what we're hoping to do with our campaign with these numbers. And so, I really appreciate everyone for watching and listening to us. And if you want to check us out on more, you can visit MejiaForController.com. It's MEJIA forcontroller.com. And so thank you.
And don't forget the TikTok.
Oh, yeah. On social media, our handles are Kenneth Mejia LA. Yeah, at Kenneth Mejia LA.
Okay, you got to get the plugs in. Speaking of which, I'll do my own shamelessly. I edit a magazine called The Land, which is journalism about Los Angeles. We publish about a lot of long-form stories that you won't see, anywhere else in a daily newspaper. Really, kind of intimate, thoughtful stories. If I don't say so myself, and our website is thelandmag.com, and we'll have a new issue in the fall. Thank you so much to SMOA for having us. This was fantastic.
Well, thanks everybody.
Cool.
Thank you.